Oh, you'll be first.
Good evening. I'm Bruce Wingus, President of the Cuyahoga Valley Photographic Society, and welcome to our presentation tonight from Amy Johnson on birds in flight. And she'll talk a little bit about dogs too, if you didn't hear about it. Couple of things to share. We've got upcoming programs. We've got photographing the Milky Way on the 18th of May, and then planning the perfect shot on the 22nd of June. And if you miss one of our programs, you can look at them on our YouTube channel. We also have a spring photo walk going on through the 2nd of May, and details of this and other events can be found on our Facebook page and on our cvps.org, our website. And finally, if you're not a member of the Photo Society, you should. Why not? There's no reason not to join. We're nice people. We come from nice families. Join us and have some fun with photography. So on that, I'm going to turn it over to CVPS member Chris Brown, who's going to introduce our speaker tonight. Chris?
Hi, guys. I am really excited to introduce you to Amy. I compete in dog agility, which is how I met Amy at a national competition years ago. And I was just blown away at how she captured the dogs in motion, and also how she captured the bond between the handlers and the dogs. It was amazing. But I also started taking online classes with Amy, which is how I got into bird photography. She was the one who I was having a difficult time getting focus with my 200 to 500 millimeter lens. And she was one who said, why don't you go practice on birds? So I did, and it was a rabbit hole. And I loved to start a lifelong, thing of bird photography and birding. And also, since I had had Amy's courses, especially on how to capture dogs in motion, it was really easy to make the transition from capturing dogs in motion to birds in flight. So I used all the skills Amy had taught me, and I now can capture birds in flight in sharp focus most of the time. So I don't want to take up any more time, but I'm really excited to introduce you to my instructor and my coach and my mentor and my friend, Amy Johnson. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. I'm really excited to talk to all of you tonight. If you don't want to hear about dogs, I'm sorry, you are going to hear a little bit about dogs. So let me share my screen and I'll get into this. But as Chris kind of alluded to, the skills in birds, or the skills in shooting dogs, cross over into the skills of shooting birds. So that's why you're going to hear a little bit about both. So we're going to talk about birds and dogs and things that go. I don't know if you had ever, any of you had ever read, I'm going to slow down. I don't know if you've ever read the book, Cars and Trucks and Things That Go, the Richard Scarry book. I remember my parents reading that to me when I was a little kid, and that's where the name kind of comes off of that. So we're going to talk about how to photograph things that move. So first, a little bit about me. My life has kind of come full circle. I started out as a math teacher, and I taught everything from basic skills up through AP Calculus and AP Statistics. And then I had kids and didn't go back to the classroom, found dog photography, and then found bird photography, and then found landscape photography, and then started teaching photography. And so I'm back to being a teacher and applying kind of the science and math perspective to the way that I teach photography. I kind of break things down into small bits. I talk about how you want to change one variable at a time, just kind of using that science brain to teach an artistic thing. This photo of me was taken by a photographer. I didn't know him. After I had taken this picture of the limpkin, he comes up to me and says, yeah, I saw you way back there. And he had a 600 millimeter lens on. So it looks like I'm practically sitting on top of the limpkin, but really there was probably 20 feet. And that through the magic of focal compression, he got both of us in the frame. So that's kind of one of my favorite profile pictures. Family-wise, I have two boys who are both in college. One is at Michigan Tech, and one is here in Minnesota at a local engineering program. So two super geeky boys, which I love. I have three dogs, a Great Dane named Spy, and a yellow lab mix named Zora, and a little terrier black and white mix named Pie. So that's kind of and I live in northern Minnesota, 2 hours south of Canada. So I'm closer to Canada than to a lot of the United States. So if you didn't think that dogs could fly, they actually can. And so this is from the competition that I was just at a couple weeks ago, the AKC Agility Nationals. And some of the dogs came flying over that A-frame. And all of my skills that I have honed on dogs and then birds are coming back to serve me really well with the dogs again. So this is the bird, literally the bird that got me hooked on bird photography. This was in December of 2015. I was in Florida. I had just finished a dog agility competition. And my family had come down for the holidays. We were staying down there rather than going back home to Minnesota. And we had rented a beach house in St. Petersburg, or on one of the canals, not right on the ocean, but on one of the canals. And the birds were flying by one morning as I was drinking my coffee. And they were pulling fish out of the bay, and they were coming down the canal. And I had all my agility gear still in my truck. And so I thought, I've got good gear. I've got a nice camera. I could probably take pictures of this. So throughout the morning, I played with just taking pictures of the birds as they came by. And this is the shot that just kind of made me, well, kind of curse, but also be a little bit happy. And my first thought was, oh, yay, this is awesome. And then, oh, shoot, I don't need another hobby. But it did definitely turn into that. And I haven't, so I always have a soft spot for the Ospreys. And then it's just kind of grown from there. So case in point, we've got a green jay from South Texas, the red-winged blackbirds, and eagles. And I was just shooting eagles up in Alaska at the beginning of March. So, okay, spoiler alert, I'm going to start tonight with the end of the story. And that is, if you want to master birds in flight, you need to go mirrorless. The eye tracking focus is as close to magic as it gets. I'll tell you more later, but really that's kind of the bottom line. If you really are serious about birds in flight and getting tack sharp pictures, this is kind of the way things are going. So yeah, that's the end of the story, but there's more to fill in before we get to the end. So I got into dogs summer of 1999. My first event I shot with a film camera, the Canon EOS Elan, I think. I don't know, it's been 22 years, I don't really remember. And then I quickly upgraded to a Canon D30, which is the first prosumer digital camera out there, digital SLR on the Canon side that was out there. And as I was ordering the camera, my, at that point, husband says to me, just promise me you'll try and make some money with this. And it paid for itself in 2 events. So yeah, it paid for itself. 70 to 200 lens is what I started with. And then I've gone to 300 and 400 millimeter lenses from there. So in terms of focusing, when you're talking about dog sports, as in birds in flight, sharp focus is critical. You want sharp focus on the dog's face and preferably on the eye. So I'm on an eternal quest to get the sharpest photos possible. And in the lighting conditions that I shoot in, that can be very challenging. So I started my first event I did with focus tracking, AI servo on the Canon, AFC on a Sony or a Nikon. And I was very, very frustrated with how badly it followed. Now, granted, this was 22 years ago. Focus tracking was not anything like it is on current DSLRs. Forget the mirrorless. Current DSLRs are pretty good. So 22 years ago, though, it was a little sketchy. But I brought in my math and science background and said, I'm going to play around with different things and see if I can make this work better. So I finally landed on, and I have originally no formal photography training. So this was all literally just me doing trial and error. And I had the thought of, what if I didn't have to focus on something that was moving? So that led me to what I now know are called focus traps. And I'm not talking about the cameras that you put in the woods and you leave for wildlife or anything. I'm talking about establishing a plane of focus and then letting the subject come to you. So first we're going to talk about dogs and focus traps. So a focus trap is best for predictable motion with something stationary to use to lock the focus. So in the case of dog sports or the agility that I do, the equipment itself becomes that target that I can lock the focus. So I lock it on something in the subject's path, wait for the subject to cross that plane of focus to take my shot. On DSLRs, you can use the micro adjust or the AF fine tune, kind of not in the way it's intended, but to push or pull the plane of focus. Let me rephrase that. It is intended to push or pull the plane of focus. I use it to deliberately front focus or back focus if I need it, because that's where I want to put the dog's face. So this was taught to me by another photographer years and years ago, and I've always thought it was one of the best little hacks of the features of a camera. Mirrorless cameras don't all have a micro adjust because they don't need it, but on DSLRs, oftentimes in the menus, you can do the micro adjust. So this is a basic photo taken with a focus trap. So I focused on the jump itself, and I could see the dog coming. I fired off a burst of probably 3, 4, or 5 images. And in the culling process in the evening, then we just pull out the one that's the most in focus on the dog's face. So this requires planning. Where do you want to put that plane of focus for getting the best shot of the dog? If I need to pull it towards me because I know that I'll get a better expression if the dog is a little farther over the bar, something like that. So for camera settings, your camera is in one shot for Canon, AFS for Nikon or Sony, or manual focus. I don't use manual focus for the dogs, but I do use it for birds, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. Highest frame rate, continuous frame rate, so 10 frames per second or more. The Canon R5 and R6 shoot in 20 frames a second. The R3 is 30 frames a second. And the Nikon and Sony have similar rates. So those mirrorless cameras, again, you can get these frame rates that are insanely high and really let you get down to the absolute perfect moment in that movement. You can put the camera on a tripod so that your focus distance is fixed. In agility, I'm on a monopod, and the distance doesn't have to be absolutely exact. I mean, there can be a little bit of give and take, and the photo will still come out fine. So you're going to focus on something stationary, and that will establish a plane of focus. And you need to put the plane of focus in a place where your subject will be in the future. Recompose if you need to. Keep the focus locked until the subject is close to the plane of focus, or you see movement coming that direction. Fire a burst of images, cull the images, and only keep the ones that are in focus in the place that you want. Okay, that's a lot of words. Let me walk you through it in pictures with a dog, and then I'll walk you through it in pictures with the birds as well. So these are all taken this way. So in the weave pole picture, I focused on the blue, let me go back, on the blue weave pole. On the dog walk picture, I focused on this pin that joins the two parts of the dog walk, and then I had the micro adjust on so that the plane of focus was pulled towards me a little bit. And that is, so it looks like the dog is past that pin, and it is, but the plane of focus had been pulled towards me. On this bottom jump, the double jump, the dogs were turning and coming towards me. So I knew I could focus on the side of the jump, and their motion would carry them in the direction of the plane of focus. It wasn't always, it wasn't very consistent about when they would hit it, but that's why you fire the burst of 3, 4, 5 images. Okay, so this is a very straightforward focus trap, focusing on the jump here in the front. And then I can clearly see the dog coming. So I start firing when I see the takeoff. I'm like a little motion detector. My brain kind of goes, ooh, movement, click. So that one's still not in focus. Dog hasn't quite gotten there yet. Almost, but not quite. And then there's where, and I know that it doesn't come through on the video very well, but here is where the dog's face is in the plane of focus. So that is where it's sharp. Dog agility, I'm often shooting at f2.8. So I have like a tiny little sliver of what part of the image is in focus. This was probably a 400 millimeter lens. I don't remember for sure, but 300 and 400 at f2.8, you get very little depth of field. So that's where frame rate comes into the picture. Okay, so why would you do this? For me, for dog sports, focus is locked and cannot be thrown off by unexpected obstacles. So when I'm trying to track a dog around an agility ring, things are getting in between me and the dog and throwing off the focus. This way, with the focus trap, my keeper rate is much more consistent. I get the same, 4, 5, 6 obstacles per dog, and I can get those consistently in focus versus, well, one dog I only got 3 and one dog I got 7. So this is better for me, better for my business, better for sales. Okay, here's what you were waiting for. Now we're going to talk about birds. The dogs are going to come back though. So this is shot with a focus trap. This is in South Texas on a bird photography workshop with Alan Murphy. And we had set up these berries as part of the feeders that we had set out for photos. And the kiskadee were consistently coming in and grabbing the berries on the wing. They're fly catchers. So of course they want to grab their food out of midair, even if the food itself isn't actually moving. If it's a fly, sure, they're going to grab it while it's moving, but even berries, they wanted to grab while they were in the air. So I was pre-focused on the berries, and I was on a tripod, camera set up, pre-focused and in manual focus so that the focus wouldn't change. And then I had my remote shutter button and just kind of sat back and didn't watch through the viewfinder because then I wouldn't see them soon enough. I just watched for movement towards those berries, fire off a burst of shots. And there were a whole lot, you get a whole lot of things that you just trash, but sometimes you get really lucky. So here's one of those series. So again, this is a feeder we had set up. The kiskadees like grapes, so we had grapes stuck on this cactus, but we also had suet and seed in the cactus itself. This was shot with the Canon R5 in electronic shutter, so 20 frames a second. It's a 300 millimeter lens with a 1.4 extender, ISO 3200, a 6400th of a second at f5. So I saw the movement of the mockingbird coming in, and I just started firing. So this one's almost sharp, but it's a little bit behind the plane of focus because the plane of focus is right at the cactus. And then there's the shot that I could keep out of it. So that's processed, of course. It's not straight out of the camera, but here's another series. So f5.6, 6400th of a second, ISO 6400, 420 millimeters. Again, the 300 with the 1.4. Canon R5, 20 frames a second. So this is a different setup. And a green jay decided that it wanted to come in. We had, again, suet and seed in the stump there. So it comes winging in, and I get a shot that just made me almost cry. I was really happy with that. Now for this one, it looks like, and I remember I had the plane of focus set back from the stump a little bit. So I pre-focused on the stump and then manually shifted the focus backwards away from me by just a tiny amount because the birds were consistently flaring behind the stumps that we had set up, not right at them. So the great thing about digital, you can shoot thousands and thousands of images. You can do trial and error. You can take a shot and see if you got your focus right. And if it's not, move it back, move it forward. And eventually you'll get things kind of set where you want. And you're going to get a whole lot of, sometimes you can't ever get a consistent spot where they're always giving you the right thing. So you hope that you have a lot of bird activity, and then you can take a bunch of shots and get, 2, 3 keepers out of a session. That's pretty good for this kind of photography. So for me, this is the best way to do the songbirds in flight. It's really hard to track the little birds. It's getting easier with the mirrorless, but this to me is still the technique that gives the most satisfactory results for what I like to see. So we'll titmouse. The feeder is cropped out. It was below, lower in the frame there. Kiskadee doing a bank, so you get a top view as it's looking down at the feeder, trying to decide if it's going to come in. You get some interesting moments of disagreement, shall we say. So you can see the red wing blackbird has its foot on the tail of the kiskadee, and the kiskadee is giving its opinion about how it feels about that. Cardinals also disagreeing about who should be the ruler of the roost there with the food in the stump. These two were just angry at each other for no apparent reason, because it's, mockingbirds and red-winged blackbirds, that's kind of their nature, I think. So I loved the deep red of the epaulets of the red-winged blackbird. I was really happy with that one. So this sequence made use of the capabilities of the mirrorless camera. So this was, I pre-focused on the stump, but I had eye tracking focus turned on. So when the green jay came to land and grabbed some food, the camera jumped to the eye. Now, if things happen super fast, it can't always hang on because it just can't. I mean, it's not perfect. But in this case, this sequence, it hung on to the eye of the green jay. And I've got 3 pictures here. So this is a little female cardinal, brave little soul that she is, going head to head with the green jay. And green jays, they're corvid, so they're going to let you know what they think too. So trying to grab the food from the green jay's mouth, comes in, grabs it. Love the eyebrows on the green jay here. And he's got his eyes closed. And then he or she, I don't know, but decides, no, I've had enough. But look at her. She still has a hold of that food. She is not going to give up. But you can see that the plane of focus is no longer here at the stump. So the mirrorless, the Canon, this was probably the R5 or R3, I don't remember which, hung on to the eye as the green jay launched. And I have 3 frames tack sharp in focus. Actually, I have more than that, but these were the 3 that I liked the best. I don't know if you can see coming through the video, but there's a little bit of a scab here. It looks like this is not the first time that she has provoked someone over something. So brave little girl. And then this one was just one of these that made me laugh. So this poor kiskadee had lost all its tail feathers. All it's got is a little bits of fuzz there. And it took off from the feeder and happened to go through the plane of focus that I had for, whatever else I was shooting. And I loved the curve of the wings and the little stumpy tail. And then the raindrops, just to give it a little more atmosphere. So, okay, so that's one way of photographing motion, with focus traps. The other way is with focus tracking. And that's what I started with in agility, wasn't happy with it, went to the focus trap, was much happier. So now I'm consistently doing birds as well as my dog shows. And with birds, there's nothing to pre-focus on unless you're doing the little ones. So with the big ones, we are going to go back to dogs. So there are sports that don't let you pre-focus. So you want to be an AFC for Nikon or Sony, or AI servo for Canon. Unpredictable motion. This is all about things that we have no idea where they're going to go. So dog sports where there's nothing predictable, or there's nothing that you can pre-focus on, even if it's predictable, like obedience patterns are predictable, but there's nothing to pre-focus on. Human sports, the list goes on. And then birds in flight and other wildlife. So in this procedure, you're going to track the movement of the subject as it moves, attempting to keep the autofocus point or points on the subject. And the camera on its part is attempting to predict where the subject will be. And the keeper rate can vary wildly depending on the situation. So this is disc dog. This is unpredictable motion. I have no idea where these dogs are going to be. So I just have to hold on and hope that I can get the focus to stay on the dog. Same with this. With birds, same thing. So you want to try and keep, this is DSLR, this is not mirrorless. This is from several years ago. You want to try and keep the focus point on the eye, but if you slip off, it's going to grab something else. So I got lucky on this one. I managed to keep the focus point on the eye. Same with this. I think it was Steve that has been up to the Sac Zim bog this past winter, and that's where I live. So these guys are my neighbors, the great gray owls. They are residents here year round. This one was perched on top of this tiny little tree. Well, it was a tall tree, but it's really spindly, but they're really light birds, even though they look big. And it was actually facing away from me. So I couldn't really see the face. And all of a sudden it turned and came in my direction. And thankfully I was set up ready to go for flight. And this is still to this day my favorite photo I've ever gotten of a great gray owl. In fact, I like it so much I have it tattooed on my arm. So grouse doing their thing on the lek in the spring. Ospreys. See, I'm kind of a sucker for the Ospreys now. This was down in Sebastian, Florida, this past winter. They were picking fish out of the inlet, and this one decided it needed to investigate what it had. Black Skimmers, this was in Texas, Galveston area last spring. Same with the pelicans. This was one of the first times I used mirrorless on birds that were moving and not just doing portrait stuff or perched. And I could not believe how well it stuck, the focus stuck on the birds. So it's not a super fantastic picture, but it represents a moment for me of going, oh my word, this is a game changer. Turkey vulture in Texas. Eagle up in Alaska. What I love about the mirrorless and the 30 frames per second is, I mean, you've got the eye tracking, which is fantastic, but the 30 frames a second on the R3 lets me pick out exactly the right moment. So this is full wing flare. There is no more room to go. And you know, a fraction of a second later, the wings are starting to come back. So I can get the exact moment of that wing movement that I want. Diving osprey again in Florida. This is a really big crop of the image. And it's kind of still, it's one of those bucket list shots for me, but I haven't quite gotten what I exactly want. But this is, you know, kind of an iteration. This is first step in the whole process. Now I have a better sense of doing the ospreys diving. The mirrorless, again, stuck on the eye. I was able to track it as it dove. And the 20, 30 frames a second gives me the right moment right before it hits the water. This is a pelican that dove, and I hope you can see there's a fish that popped out of the water across from it. So this isn't quite flying, but it's the moment after it was done flying. The fish is flying. We'll go with that. Harris's hawk in South Texas. Again, full wing flare, that the 30 frames a second gives you every single little frame from full wing extension to not. And so you get to pick out the exact right moment. Of course, you're also hoping that the head is turned in the right direction, that the sky and the background are working for you, but at least you've got a fighting chance of getting a wing position that you like. Okay, so let's talk about how to get better at birds in flight. So spoiler alert, Chris knows this, I am a control freak. Like, I don't want to have the camera control anything. And in fact, that may be what has been hardest about going to mirrorless is I am starting to have to let the camera control a few things. And the first few times I went out for birds with the R5, I was fighting it in a lot of ways. I was trying to do too much. And I had to just let go and let the focus points do whatever they were going to do. And I just had to do the composition. And so this is the camera and I, we're coming to terms. We're getting there, but I am a control freak, and you'll see that now in what else I'm going to talk about. So gear and settings. One of my favorite photographers is out in the Pacific Northwest, I believe, David Duchemin, and his catchphrase, so to speak, is gear is good, vision is better. He's been saying that for years and years and years and years. And I always appreciate that. I do think vision is good. I think, and I talk about it in terms of intent, in going out and getting what you intend to get, because that guides what, the choices that you make as you're shooting. But I also say gear is awesome. And my students just laugh at me when I say that, but they know it's true because gear is awesome. It is. So imagine my surprise when on January 2nd of 2020, David Duchemin publishes a blog post and says in it, "So I'd like to offer what might be a very unexpected update to my mantra. Gear is not just good, it's miraculous. What it allows us to do or helps us to do is nothing short of alchemy." He is not wrong. In other words, gear is awesome. So he finally has come around to my point of view. I had nothing to do with it, but gear is awesome. Okay, so what's in my bag? This is kind of the evolution of my birding rig. So I first started out with a 1DX, Canon 1DX, and a 400 millimeter 2.8 because that was my agility rig. That's what I use for dog sports. I did add a Sigma 150 to 600 sport version. That was kind of a beast of a lens, really hard to handhold because of the way the weight was balanced. I was starting to teach classes online and I had a lot of Nikon shooters. And so I wanted to learn Nikon. So I picked up a Nikon D500 and the 200 to 500 millimeter lens, figuring that I would learn to use a Nikon while I was shooting birds. And then I eventually grabbed a D850 and a D5 as well, and was using Nikon for my agility pretty consistently for the last few years. Nothing wrong with Canon. I like to be multilingual, so to speak. In December of 2020, I got a Canon R5 and R6. I know, I couldn't decide. I got one of each. And I finally got a 600 millimeter lens, the version 3, so the newest one. It is the EF, and so I have to use it with an adapter, but that doesn't seem to really matter. It's pretty flawless. And then sometime in 2021, I needed to learn Sony because I have students who are Sony shooters and I need to be able to speak their language. So I picked up a used Sony A9 II and a 200 to 600 millimeter lens because again, I can use it with birding. And now though I've gone, if you tell me I have to pick one thing, now my one thing is the Canon R3 and the 600 millimeter lens. So that's my go-to at this point. I have the whole range. I've got 70 to 200, some shorter lenses for landscapes. And I do still have an EF 100 to 400 that I can use with the 1.4 extender. But generally for birds, I'm using that 600 millimeter and the R3. So it's a sweet, sweet piece of equipment. Okay, so that's gear. Gear's awesome. And you can ask me about that when we're done if you want to know more. Basic camera settings for birds in flight. You should be, I hate to say should. It is better to shoot RAW than it is to shoot JPEG. JPEG, your camera kind of bakes in all of the choices about how the image should look. Remember the control freak thing? Yeah, RAW is for the control freaks who want to do it all themselves. If you don't need to be a control freak, you are welcome to shoot JPEG, but then you have to live with some of the things that the camera does, especially white balance. So if you don't get the right white balance, you cannot make serious changes to it with a JPEG that you can do with a RAW. I'm a manual exposure person, 99%. Every once in a while, I'll throw it into aperture priority if I'm really feeling lazy. But that would be something like if I needed to take a family picture. If I'm doing birds, if I'm doing dog sports, it's all manual exposure all the time. In terms of things that are moving, you want to prioritize your shutter speed because you cannot fix blurry pictures after the fact. There is some software that can do some, but for the most part, blur is a really, really hard thing to fix. Fast glass is your friend. Those f2.8 and f4 lenses are really good. And then embrace high ISO. So again, a thing that I say, maybe not always like this, but don't be stingy with your shutter speed. So the faster your subject moves, this should all be very intuitive, at least most of these. The faster your subject moves, the more shutter speed you need. That seems pretty straightforward. The more the subject fills the frame, the more shutter speed you need. That one isn't always intuitive, but if you think about it, if your subject is really close to you, that means it's going from one side to the other. It's going all the way across the frame. If it's farther away and it moves the same amount, it's only moving a little bit in your frame. It's not moving very far. So if the relative speed, the way it looks to you, is that it's moving faster if it's filling your frame. So then we're back to if it moves faster, you need more shutter speed. The next one's related. The longer the focal length, the more shutter speed you need. This is related to how much of the frame the subject is crossing in that time, but it also is related to camera blur from motion. Let me try that again. To motion blur from camera shake. There we go. So if you're hand holding a 600 millimeter lens, which I do, then you need to make sure that you have at least a 600th of a second, which is bare minimum for not getting blur in there from camera shake. I generally try and do at least twice the reciprocal of the focal length. And that even isn't always fast enough for the subject that I'm doing. So then I go back to how fast my subject moves. I got to figure out how fast I need. The last one is again, not necessarily intuitive, but it's related to all of them. So the more megapixels your camera has, the more shutter speed you need, because again, it's about a relative thing. It's how many pixels is that subject crossing in the time frame that you're taking the picture. So if you have a 45 megapixel camera, you need to up your shutter speed more than if you have a 24 megapixel camera. So R3 is a 24 and the R5 is a 45. So I need to, all other things being equal, I need to use a faster shutter speed on my R5 than I do on my R3. I generally would use the same, but. And then I always say, don't be afraid of ISO. This is like one of my things. So going to the dogs, when I'm shooting an indoor dog event these days, I'm using either a Canon 1DX Mark III or a Nikon D6, and I am at ISO 80,000. That is 80000. That's a 5-digit number. And then I can get a shutter speed of a 2500th of a second, which gives me everything, all of the hairs on the dog are pretty much, there's no blur even in those. I'm generally at f2.8, so very narrow depth of field, but 80,000 ISO means I can get the shutter speed that I want and not have to underexpose. So ISO can make the difference between a blurry mess and an award winner. Noise can be fixed, blur cannot. I will prioritize that shutter speed until the cows come home. I will live with any amount of noise that you throw at me if I can get a sharp picture. I know that the noise complicates the sharpness. I know there's a little bit of a trade-off there. But again, software is much better at fixing noise than it is at fixing blur at this point. You know, give it another 5 years, who knows? The critical thing with using ISO is that you do not underexpose. If you brighten an image that you have underexposed, you are going to reveal the noise. And you're going to see more noise than if you had used a higher ISO and exposed it properly, or even, you know, that whole exposed to the right. Exposed to the right isn't about blowing out highlights. It's just about making it as bright as you can, because then you've got a little bit of leeway to darken it back down again in post-processing, and you hide any noise that you're getting from ISO. So I know it can be counterintuitive. Well, I can brighten the image in post. Well, you can, but then you're going to have more of a cleanup to do. And the noise that you get from brightening an image afterwards generally is uglier and harder to deal with than the noise that you get from using a higher ISO and processing it. That's just in my experience. So your mileage may vary. Other things to think about when you want to get better pictures of birds in flight. So you need to properly support your camera. I can handhold the 600 for most things. If I'm going to be holding it for up and tracking birds for a long time, I may put it on a tripod with a gimbal. I may use a monopod. In agility, I use a monopod. Observe your physical limitations. So if you can't handhold a 600, and that isn't for everybody, then figure out how to, if you want to use a 600 millimeter lens, then figure out how to make it physically possible for you. Is that a tripod? Is that a monopod? Is it a 600 that's not an f4? Is it something that's a smaller aperture, but maybe is lighter weight, and you can do that. A lot of people are moving to mirrorless, not just because of the better autofocus system, but because they are lighter in weight. The R3 and the 1DX Mark III are significantly different in weight. The R3, even though it's about the same, it's a hair smaller, but not much, is definitely a lighter weight camera. Observe the limitations of your gear. If you are not lucky like I am and can shoot with the latest and greatest, then you need to understand what your limitations are. Do you not have enough ISO to really properly expose if the light isn't good? Does your autofocus system not keep up with birds very well? If you have an older camera, it's not going to, you're generally just not going to be able to get the same kind of images that someone who has more current gear has. And that's not the fault of your skills. That is just simply the limitation of the gear that you have. And the more you understand where those limits are, the more you can maximize your gear and get the best that you possibly can. And then when you upgrade, then you're going to see how much your camera was holding you back. And you're going to go, oh, look, I'm a way better photographer than I thought I was. Look at all these pictures I can get now, which is a thing. I mean, it kind of feels like cheating when you upgrade your camera. I mean, when I went to the mirrorless, it sort of feels like I'm cheating a bit, but I'm not. I'm just leveraging all of the skills that I've built up over the years. So this is other considerations, wind and weather. If you have, the birds are always, the big birds take off, not just big, all of the birds generally take off and land into the wind. So if the wind is at your back, that means they're going to be landing with their backside to you. If the wind is in your face, then they're going to be landing, looking at you and taking off. So you want to, I think I said that right. I've got to think about it. If the wind is in my face, I think I said it backwards. I should write it out. It's not that hard. So I'm sorry, I did say it backwards. If the wind is at my back, then they're going to be coming at me when they land and when they take off. If the wind is in my face, then they're going to be landing away from me or taking off away from me. So if you are going out for takeoff and landing shots or diving ospreys, for instance, I had this happen in December, when the wind was from the wrong direction, when the wind was from the north and I was on the south side of the channel, then the birds were always diving with their faces away from me, their faces and their talons away from me. So I couldn't get the shot that I wanted. So this is also tied into knowing the behavior of your subject so you can predict what it might do next. If you know that it's been hunting in a certain area, this is a snail kite from Florida, and this was a park, Newton Park in Orlando, and the kites come up and fly along the shoreline in the morning. And so I knew that if I just waited in one spot, I would get several birds throughout, a couple hours that would go up and down. They'd go make one pass and they'd make some loops. This is one of those loops. And then they'd move on down the shore. And then another one would come down and it would kind of make loops around the shore. So I just had to stand and wait for them. One of the things my dad likes to say is practice makes permanent. So oftentimes you'll hear practice makes perfect. Yes and no, but really what practice does is it solidifies those skills and makes them become habit and muscle memory, and that's when it's really important. So there are two things that I like to teach my students when it comes to practicing focusing. I want to teach them how to acquire focus. This is the science thing again, break it down into small pieces. So how to acquire focus and how to hold the focus. So acquiring focus is non-trivial. This is a hard skill, especially if you're starting with a moving subject and a really long lens. So we're going to back that off on the difficulty level and start with a stationary subject and a short lens. So the idea, as I drop my lens cover, the idea is that you want to find the thing you're focusing on, look at it, and then bring your lens up to your face, bring your camera up to your face, and basically just keep staring at the thing and let the camera get in between you. You're not trying to put the camera up and then find it. You want to find it and then bring the camera up. That is a much easier way to find it. So you start with a short lens and a stationary subject, and then you gradually increase the difficulty level. Then go to a longer lens and a stationary subject. Then try a short lens and a moving subject. So you've got a much wider view. It's much easier to spot that moving thing in your lens. Then go to the longer lens and a moving subject. So you can do this right in your house, especially the stationary stuff. Find a plant and a short lens and just see how consistently you can, put the camera up and still keep your eye on the subject. Then find something that's moving, maybe a bird outside, or I don't know, find something local and try it, and just gradually just keep practicing that, because that's the kind of thing that you have. That's the kind of skill you need to have to do good birds in flight. It isn't an easy thing to pick up a 600 millimeter lens and find an osprey in the sky and get it in the frame, let alone be able to focus on it, let alone be able to track it. So if you can get better at spotting it through the lens, then you're going to have a better time getting a photo. So the second skill is holding the focus. So once you can reliably get the camera to focus on your subject, then you need to practice keeping it in the viewfinder. So again, we're going to start without focusing. Just pick it up and see if you can keep the shape of whatever it is that's moving in the within the limits of your view. Then gradually increase the difficulty level. Start using your focus. Try a short lens with slower birds. Gulls are excellent birds to practice on. If you didn't already know this, you'll hear that from a wide variety of photographers. Gulls are a really, really good bird to practice on. They may not be your thing for what you actually want to shoot, but they are really good practice birds. They're not slow, but they're slower, and they don't make super quick changes of direction. They have nice swooping paths that you can follow. So gradually go from a short lens to a longer lens, then go back to your short lens with the faster birds, practice keeping them in the frame, gradually increase the length, whether it's by zooming or by changing lenses. The details don't matter, but start with something easier, get your skills solid on that, and then move to something that's harder. Okay, so here we have reached the end of the story, and I'm going to talk just a little bit about the magic of mirrorless, as if I haven't already. So getting a picture of a kingfisher in flight, let alone one that's just caught a fish, it's possible before mirrorless, but I was able to track it coming out of the water, and the focus stayed on its eye. And I'm not sure I have the skills yet to do that with the DSLR. With the mirrorless, the beauty of it is you just have to keep the bird within the bounds of the frame. You don't have to worry about where the focus point is. The focus point takes care of itself. The focus point finds the eye. I just have to keep the bird in the frame. It's a lot more like doing video with your phone, your cell phone, than it is like actually taking pictures. So all of us are pretty good. If you say, hey, will you film my daughter doing a swim, I don't know, playing soccer, you can usually put your phone up and follow the kid around the soccer field, and you'll keep the kid in the frame, and it's no big deal. Same thing with this. This is more like shooting a video than it is like taking pictures in some ways. So another, again, Osprey. I saw it coming. This was coming down the beach by my Airbnb that I was staying at. And all I had to do was keep the wings from getting clipped off by the edge, and the focus took care of itself. It works really good. I know this bird isn't flying, but it works really well on perched birds as well. So the beauty of perched birds is that, again, you let the focus find the eye, and then you can compose as you're shooting. So rather than having to lock your focus and recompose, lock focus, recompose, lock focus, recompose, or if you're a back button focus user, I know there are things like that too, but you don't have to think about where the focus point is. You just need to think about what the composition is. So for me, it took away a whole layer of things I had to think about that I thought were really important. And yes, it's important where the focus point is, but I had to let go of that control and just let the camera do it. And because it does it brilliantly. That's what it was designed to do. So this was on the workshop I was at in Alaska in March, and I was sitting on the beach and the birds were coming in, and I had the camera. So first, let me back up. The R5 and R6, the viewfinder, the screen on the back flips out. The Z9, it flips just this way, but with the Rs, it flips kind of all the way around. So I had the camera in my lap. I was looking straight down at the screen, and I had eye tracking focus on, and I was just trusting the camera to get the eyes, and it did multiple times. So all I did was treat it like a video. I made sure that I kept the wings within the bounds of the frame, and the camera took care of the focus. Same with this. I was sitting, I may have had this up to my face. I don't remember for sure. But again, sitting low so I could get that nice low angle. And then you can do fun stuff. Sorry, this just seemed perfect. The juvenile was just not having a good day, and the adult was just not having a good day either. So I don't normally do this kind of stuff with my photos, but this one screamed for it. The eagles would make passes by the boat for the fish, and they make a pass and come up and twist around and turn around and do flippy things and then come back. And the camera with the eye tracking could follow all of that movement. I have whole series of 30 plus frames from one bird that are tack sharp all the way through. I could never, ever, I did shoot eagles in Alaska in 2019. I was on a family vacation. And I don't have nearly that many pictures in focus as I got when I was there in March of this year. This kind of thing, the bird had just taken off. So it was not moving incredibly fast, but still to be able to, the camera found the eye through the feathers, which I was shocked that this one came out. You had all kinds of interesting moments. Little wide angle work with eagles. That was fun. So then you get the quintessential Alaska landscape with the quintessential Alaska bird. This is going back to this is South Texas, so the red wing blackbirds, again, focusing on the stump where the food was, and when they get irritated, they fight straight up. So they stay in your plane of focus for a long time, and you get some really interesting wing positions. This was a thrasher, long-billed thrasher, taking off from the stump. So you can see the feet back here. It's pushed off and it came straight at me. And this was where I had the eye tracking on, and it managed to hang on to the eye as the bird came launch off the perch towards me. It wasn't that close to me. I think I was on a 600mm lens, but it hung on to that eye, and I was just, again, floored. I could never have gotten a shot like this. The focus tracking of a DSLR would never have kept up with this, never. Tracked the bird all the way into the water, and then it would manage to hang on to it as it popped up out. You can see there's a fish here. So if you're interested in learning more, I do teach online. I teach at where Chris and I met was Fenzi Dog Sports Academy. And then I also have an online education site with Lisa Langell that's called Focus Your Art. I offer mentorships, workshops, online privates. You can friend request me on Facebook and then send me a message. You can email me, amy@focusyourart.com. And then I have several. I've got GreatDanePhotos.com is my dog shows. Focus Your Art is the online education. And then I'm at Fenzi Dog Sports Academy. You can look for the faculty listing and find me there. So, all right. Whoo, nice timing. I wasn't quite sure how long it would go, but I am happy to answer any questions if I glossed over something or you want to know more about something.
Amy, I'm curious, can I get the same photos with my iPhone that you were getting?
Sure. The Osprey will be really tack sharp, but it'll be about, the size of 2 pixels.
Dang, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can't hang it on your wall. You can look at it on your phone, but won't blow up to a frameable thing very easily.
Very nice.
All right.
Amy, what's your favorite dog?
Well, Great Dane, because that's what I have. So the criteria to live in my house if you're a dog, the criteria is you have to be dumber than me, because I cannot live with a dog that's going to outsmart me. So Great Danes are like the perfect mix of cuddly and not dumb. It's not a put down. Trust me, people, don't send me emails saying, how dare you? No, really, I just need dogs that aren't smarter than me. and Great Danes are about perfect. So I call him my house pony. I always wanted horses growing up. I love for photographing though, if we go to that side, I love the border collies and the dogs that move really fast, just because then that's like doing the birds. I mean, it's the same kind of skills, and it just gets the adrenaline pumping. So I have in the chat, there's one that came in.
What shutter speed do you normally use for flying birds?
Say that again.
What's the shutter speed do you normally use?
Oh, shutter speed, sure. And I meant to put that in there. So when we're talking about birds in flight, so the big birds, the raptors, I would want a minimum of like a 1/1600th of a second. And I'll usually crank it, if I've got good light, I'll go to 3200th or a 4000th, just because I've got the extra, light to spare. But 1/1600th is kind of a bare minimum. For the little birds, you want a minimum of 4000th of a second. And then 8000th is ideal. So with the songbirds in flight, you need more shutter speed, which can be challenging if you've got, overcast or it's, too early in the morning, too late at night. But yeah, you really need to start to stop the motion of those wings. You need a 4000th of a second. And if you totally want to stop it, you got to go to at least 8000th. The R3 can do shutter speeds of faster than 8000th, which I did a little playing with that, but you need a lot of light for that. So I tried a few at 10,000th of a second, just because I could. Once you get to 8, there's not a whole lot of, you can't like reverse time or anything if you get it fast enough. So in the chat, there's a question too. Can you talk about rolling shutter with mirrorless when imaging birds in flight, especially the tips of the primary feathers looking slightly more curved than natural? Yes, I can actually. And I wish I had quick access. Two times I've noticed it. When I was doing the kingfisher, it shook its head, and I have a picture where the bill is curved because it shook its head so fast, and I was on the R5 and I had the rolling shutter effect. So rolling shutter is what happens when the camera can't write the data fast enough because it's writing it line by line. And so what it happens is it's, in the instant of time it takes to take the picture, the pixels at the top are from a different fraction of time than the pixels at the bottom. And so you get this weird distortion, or you can get this weird distortion. And if you're shooting with a really fast shutter speed, fast moving things, that's when it shows up. R3 has a fast enough readout from the sensor that it doesn't have rolling shutter problems. Z9, the Nikon, also has fixed that problem. I'm pretty sure the A1 has too, but don't quote me on that. But the R5 and R6 definitely have rolling shutter. If you are doing something that's moving fast, you can get really weird distortions. I have seen it in my agility pictures. The one time I tried the R6, the dog was fine because I was panning with the motion, but the jump that it was going over, instead of being upright, was all slanted like this. So, if you didn't look closely, you wouldn't know anything weird was going on. But if you started to think about, wait, that jump should be like this. So it can be something that you have to watch out for. But again, the better they make the brains of these cameras, the faster the sensors are, the faster the guts of it are, the less and less we're going to see the rolling shutter with this. But it is something you need to be aware of. So, what else?
If you were in charge of all cameras, what would be the next feature you would like to see that you don't have right now?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, let me start by saying, going from the R5 to the R3 added a few things that I needed to be able to shoot dog agility. So R5 and the R6, the electronic shutter is silent, which sounds all great, or doesn't sound, until you actually use it and you realize how much you rely on that auditory feedback to know that you're actually taking pictures and to know when to stop taking pictures. There's a slight flicker in the viewfinder that tells you it's taking pictures, but that auditory feedback when I'm doing dogs, I need that to know when to stop the burst. And I could get used to the silent, but it's very difficult. The R3, they gave I can have a shutter click now for the mirrorless. With the R5, 20 frames a second, it's either 20 frames a second or it's not. So if you're an electronic shutter, it's either all or nothing. And if I'm going to use an electronic shutter, I don't want 20 frames a second for the dogs. And in fact, for the big birds in flight, 20 is a lot. You don't always need that many, but there's no way to knock that down in any sort of reasonable manner. It's kind of I think you can knock it down to just a few frames a second, but I want something in between. So then on the R3, there's the super low shutter frame rate, and then there's a 15 frames a second, and then there's 30 frames a second. So in terms of where should it go next, I would like a few more megapixels than 24, which is what the R3 has. Agility, I don't need it, but birds, I really like the R5 in terms of 45 megapixels. I can do some major cropping if I need to. But then you also get into file sizes being monstrous. So there's that trade-off. I don't think there's a whole lot that I'm like craving at this point. I'm really curious to see if there's going to be, I mean, Canon has said that the R3 is not their flagship. So that must mean there's some sort of R1 or, believe me, I do not have any inside information. I am just repeating the rumors that I've heard. But logically, it seems to make sense that if this isn't the flagship, then what is the flagship? So I'm curious to see if it's going to be an R3 with higher megapixel, what the deal is going to be with that. So there's not a lot more that I need, to be very honest. The eye tracking is phenomenal. Just, I can't even get over how good it is. So that's made me happy for a long time. Anything else?
Anybody else have any questions? Now's your chance to ask Amy, although you can email her later. I'm sure she'll answer your questions. Any other questions out there this evening? Okay, I think this ends our program for the night. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Amy, for a very interesting program. Again, we've got a photographing the Milky Way on the 18th of May and planning the perfect shot on the 22nd of June. Hope to see you all out as spring comes to the Cuyahoga Valley. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Amy. Appreciate it. Bye.
Thanks. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.